Um, Last night I was reading Professor Michael E. Hudson's biography, biography that was posted in 2018 on his blog, and he gave I think it was a transcript of a online talk about his life. And he said he was born in the same city that I was born in Minneapolis. And he said it was the only Trotskyite city in the U.S., meaning that the labor movement was controlled by Trotskyites, followers of Leon Trotsky, and that his dad, Michael E. Hudson's dad, was a prominent Trotskyite, and that his dad would go to Mexico, or his dad's friends would go to Mexico, I'm not sure which one, and they would hang out with Trotsky, and then Michael E. Hudson grew up hanging out with these prominent Russian Trotskyites that were new Lenin and stuff like that. And then his dad got sent off to federal prison. A federal prison that I drive past. It's in a town north of the Twin Cities, because his dad was the newspaper editor for one of the labor newspapers that was key to the Teamsters strike of the mid 30s. I think it was like 1936 to 1937. And there's a great documentary about this that was posted on YouTube. And there's a new museum in St. Paul. Or no, I think it's St. Paul, yeah. East side St. Paul. About the labor movement of the 30s in the Twin Cities. And I was reading an article about this recently where they're talking about the wheat mills, because it's basically Minneapolis started out from flour mills to make flour from the wheat farmers. And so the owners of the mills at first were trying to be real worker friendly, but then the owners started to use immigrant labor to keep the wages down, and that was kind of the first big unionizing movement in the Twin Cities, was based on the flour mills. What's interesting is that when I hung out in the activist scene in the Twin Cities, in Minneapolis, I was friends with a hippie activist who was also a Trotskyite, and he was of native heritage, so he spoke Spanish. He was from New Mexico. I think he was Native American, but he never told me he was Native American. He looked Native American. And we were best friends for a few years. I don't know, 5 years probably. And he went by the name Conspiracy Dan. And Conspiracy Dan was like a real tall guy, and I mean, not super tall, but he had real broad shoulders, and he was kind of a ladies' man because he was real, what's the word? Socially adept. He was good at flirting and making everybody laugh. And so I would sit with him and ask him all these questions about activism in the 60s or whatever. And he was mainly a stoner guy. He would spend his day, it turned out he lived at this lady's house in like the hippie neighborhood of Minneapolis. And he would hang out at the Anarchist cafe. He was the janitor there. He would volunteer as janitor, and then they would pay him with food, with a big pancake, whole wheat pancake. and and then he would get stoned during the day. I never saw him smoke. Never smoked with him or anything. I wasn't, but we would talk about activism and hang out. And we both rode bicycle. That's how we got around. So, and then we'd hang out at the other anarchist cafe. And so he was friends with the other 60 hippie activists that were like him. They were like sort of like homeless, or actually some of them. Another guy, he played music on the streets for money, but he also lived at somebody's house. I think he rented a room. Yeah, he rented a room in the apartment building that I ended up renting at. And then another lady was homeless, and she had been the girlfriend of this other famous homeless guy who would dress like a bohemian with a big top hat. And his name was Chester. And so these were all 60s activists. The musician guy, he changed his name. They both changed their names, and they were hiding from student loans. They owned student loans, and so instead of paying the student loans, they just like became homeless and hid out, and they collected maybe some like a disability payment, I think, maybe. I know one of them did, but okay, so yeah, I started doing organic cocoa for tryptamine, because it turns out that I did a blog post on this a few years ago, that organic cocoa is hot. There's a high level of tryptamine in it, and cocoa was a sacred food for the Mayans and Aztecs in Mexico and Central America. And so sure enough, my dreams became much more vivid after doing like 2 big heaping spoonfuls of cocoa powder, organic, fair trade, equal exchange cocoa powder. So that's all I really wanted to say, is that I think that's a good way to go in terms of a legal supplement, because it also dilates the blood vessels, and so it's a healthy thing to have, just straight cocoa powder with spirulina, so you get that brown, dark black, brown, and green, and it's a nice way to get more vivid dreams, because if we use the internet all the time, it sucks up our spiritual energy, and we stop having vivid dreams versus meditating all the time. So I don't know what happened to Conspiracy Dan. The other musician hippie guy was like, oh yeah, he's working at some massage parlor in St. Paul, which is, some underground illegal economy thing, and never saw him again. I'd hear stories about him occasionally. There's reference to him online. There's been mention of him. That was like 10 years ago by an activist friend. And then, of course, the George Floyd uprising happened, and then the pandemic, or which one was first? I can't remember. Yeah, so I don't know to find out if he's still alive or whatever, but we didn't, at the end, I could read his energy, and he had some issues, let's just say that. So he grew up working he said he knew people who worked in the uranium mines in New Mexico, so that's how I realized, oh yeah, he's got to be Native American. He said his dad was a plumber in California, New Mexico, something like that. Well, there you go. He finally told me about this really, really cool activist book. It was in the law. I found it in the law library. I can't remember the name of it. And when he told me, I immediately went and dug it out of the library, looked it up, found it, and was reading it in the library, because at this point I wasn't a student anymore, so I couldn't check it out. But and I can't remember the name of it, but it was a legitimately cool book, because at this point I'm like, so you don't do anything? Because I thought he's an activist, but he would just kind of bicycle around to the demonstrations and then try to pick up the chicks. But at this point he was getting pretty old. He actually did have a girlfriend. He scored a girlfriend who was friends with my girlfriend at the time. So at one time we were both dating like friends, even though he was 30 years older than me. He liked to do artwork too, and that fit in with the Trotskyite thing, because like Trotskyite was like the Frida Kahlo scene, the anarchist socialist artwork. So anyway, well, yeah, he told me about another guy that I looked up that was interesting. He introduced me to a friend of his who was a Freemason, and I went to the Freemason. He invited me to go visit his Freemason lodge in Minneapolis, and he's like, "Yeah, you should become a Freemason. You can meditate here." And then I never saw that guy again. He was helping out his mom. He was Mexican American also, so that's probably why they were friends, because Dan spoke Spanish. So anyway, it was an interesting time to hang out with Conspiracy Dan, and he was famous as a conspiracist in the. Oh, he would read that conspiracy magazine that came out of Australia. I can't remember the name of it though. Oh, it would sell in the New Age stores in the city in Minneapolis. They would sell it in the New Age store. Well, so we started hanging out probably in the late 90s, like 1996. Yeah, 97. And then we stayed friends until after 9/11. So probably all the way up to 2007. We were friends for 10 years. We were close friends. So it was an interesting time because he saw me change, um, and then we parted ways because I realized he was messed up. He had been, I think he must have been abused when he was younger. Something happened to him. But anyway, hats off to Conspiracy Dan, the stoner act or countercultural, infamous homeless person, stoner, artist.